Morty Smith's story does not begin with trauma. It begins with a kind of fragile, ordinary innocence. The sort of innocence that belongs to kids who still believe school is the center of the universe, who still think problems can be solved by telling the truth, who still feel the world is small enough to understand if they try hard enough. Morty starts his life in that quiet space, a space where his biggest worries are homework, awkward conversations, and the unpredictable waves of adolescence. It is a simple life, an unremarkable life, a life that could have stayed intact if the universe had not chosen to expand around him before he was ready. Morty's innocence is not naive, it is hopeful. He believes that people are mostly good. That rules work when everyone follows them. That feelings matter. That kindness counts for something. He trusts adults, even the unreliable ones. He assumes that the world makes sense, even when it confuses him. This trust becomes the first thing to crack as he steps into Rick's orbit. Not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually, like a hairline fracture in glass that grows with every moment of pressure. At first, Morty sees Rick as an exciting force, a chaotic but brilliant grandfather who represents a break from monotony. Morty does not recognize the dangers beneath that excitement. He does not understand what it means to stand beside someone who treats morality like a suggestion and danger like a minor inconvenience. Morty only sees the thrill, the possibility, the escape. He wants to feel special. He wants to feel chosen. He wants to feel like his life matters beyond the walls of his school and the limits of his neighborhood. Rick offers him that, even if the offer comes wrapped in recklessness. The first cracks in Morty's innocence appear when he realizes that the universe is far larger and far crueler than he imagined. He learns this not through grand speeches, but through small moments. A creature that should not exist screams in fear. A stranger suffers for reasons Morty cannot understand. A life ends abruptly with no consequence, no justice, no explanation. The universe does not follow the moral rules he was taught. It has no obligation to be fair. Morty feels the truth settle in his chest, heavy and cold. Innocence fades not through violence, but through understanding. He begins to see that Rick does not shield him from that truth. Rick does not soften the blow. Rick treats the universe like a game where survival requires detachment, calculation, and a willingness to overlook suffering. Morty tries to mimic this attitude, but something inside him resists. He cannot pretend he is unaffected. He cannot ignore the fear or the sadness. He holds on to kindness, even when kindness puts him in danger. This tension becomes the core of his struggle. The universe demands hardness. Morty refuses to give up softness. The cracks in his innocence appear precisely because he tries to carry empathy into a phase universe that does not reward it. One of the earliest shifts happens when Morty realizes that choices in Rick's world always carry weight, and that weight does not disappear once the moment ends. His decisions linger in his thoughts long after Rick has moved on. Morty replay conversations, mistakes, near escapes. He wonders whether he could have done something differently, whether he should have spoken up, whether he should have walked away. These loops of reflection become a new part of his identity. Morty begins to understand that innocence is not simply a lack of knowledge, it is a lack of weight. And weight, once gained, cannot be set down. Morty's innocence continues to erode each time he sees Rick solve problems through force, manipulation, or indifference. Morty does not want to judge him, because he admires Rick deeply. But admiration does not erase discomfort. Morty begins to recognize contradictions in Rick. He sees brilliance coupled with carelessness, power coupled with exhaustion, authority coupled with loneliness. These contradictions confuse Morty. He wants Rick to be a figure he can trust without hesitation. Instead, Rick becomes someone who teaches Morty lessons he is too young to learn. Lessons about survival, about consequence, about grief. The cracks widen the first time Morty realizes that Rick's choices put others at risk, including him. It is one thing to learn that the universe is dangerous. It is another to learn that danger might come from someone you love. Morty begins to feel something unfamiliar, a mix of fear and understanding. Fear, because he knows Rick will not always choose safety. Understanding, because he senses Rick cannot help himself. These feelings settle into Morty like sediment, adding new layers to his emotional landscape. Innocence cannot coexist with this knowledge. It breaks slowly, quietly, under the pressure of truth. As Morty's innocence fades, he does not become cynical. He becomes aware. He sees the chaos behind every adventure. He feels the weight behind every decision. He hears the silence between arguments. He notices the exhaustion behind Rick's brilliance. Awareness grows within him like a second consciousness, a voice that narrates the significance of each moment, even when he wishes he could remain ignorant. This voice becomes his companion, shaping the way he experiences the world. One of the most important cracks appears when Morty realizes that he cannot rely on Rick emotionally. Rick will protect Morty physically when it suits him, but emotional safety is not something he provides. Morty begins to understand that he must hold his own emotions quietly. He must soothe himself. He must interpret danger alone. This forces him to grow up emotionally faster than he should. Innocence depends on being able to trust someone completely. Morty loses that possibility far earlier than most children. He also begins to question his own place in the universe. Once he sees how vast and indifferent everything is, he wonders what one life is worth, what his life is worth. These questions are too heavy for a child, but Morty carries them anyway. They linger in his mind after every adventure, every confrontation, every moment of confusion. He tries to find meaning, but meaning becomes slippery. The universe does not offer answers. Morty must create his own. Yet, even as his innocence fades, Morty holds on to pieces of his original self. He still wants to help people. He still feels compassion. He still believes in fairness, even when the universe rejects it. These pieces of him do not disappear. They simply become harder to maintain. He protects them like fragile treasures. Rick notices this sometimes, but rarely comments. Morty's sadness begins to grow in the space between who he was and who he is becoming. Morty's innocence finally reaches a breaking point when he realizes that he cannot return to the simplicity of his past. There is no way back to a world where his worries were manageable. He has seen too much, felt too much, lost too much. The universe has expanded beyond the boundaries of childhood. Morty understands that innocence is not something taken from him. It is something he outgrows through pain, experience, and awareness. But he does not lose everything. The cracks in his innocence do not destroy him. They reveal him. They carve space for empathy, courage, resilience, and understanding. They create room for growth, for depth, for strength. Morty begins to recognize that sadness is not the opposite of innocence. Sadness is what happens when awareness meets compassion, when a child tries to remain kind in a world that punishes kindness, when someone tries to hold on to meaning in a universe that refuses to offer any. Morty's sadness begins here. In the first cracks, in the first moments where he realizes that the world is far bigger, far darker, and far more fragile than he imagined. But his sadness does not crush him. It shapes to him. It becomes the quiet truth he carries forward into every chapter of his life. Morty Smith never asked to be chosen. He never raised his hand, never volunteered, never imagined himself as the second half of a duo that would cut through realities like pages in a book. The truth is, Morty was chosen long before he understood what choice even meant. Chosen not out of affection, not out of trust, not even out of belief in his potential. He was chosen because he was convenient, because he was available, because he was the closest person in Rick's reach who would not refuse him. This realization comes slowly for Morty, but once it arrives, it becomes one of the heaviest truths he carries. In the beginning, being chosen feels flattering. Morty thinks it must mean something. He thinks it must reflect some special trait inside him. Maybe Rick sees something in him that no one else sees. Maybe this means he is brave or destined for something important. Maybe the universe is finally offering him purpose. He clings to these thoughts because they make the chaotic world feel meaningful. They make him feel less small. But as the chaos deepens, Morty begins to notice the cracks in this belief. Rick does not choose him because he needs a partner. Rick chooses him because he needs a witness, a shield, a distraction, a grounding force, someone who can hold on to morality just enough to keep him tethered, but not enough to slow him down. Morty realizes that Rick relies on him in ways that have nothing to do with love. Rick uses Morty's innocence as leverage. He uses Morty's compassion as a tool. He uses Morty's presence to justify decisions he does not want to face alone. This truth sinks into Morty slowly, like a cold tide rising around his ankles. Being chosen is not a gift, it is a burden, a responsibility he never agreed to, but cannot easily escape. Morty starts to understand that every adventure comes with expectations he cannot fulfill. He must be brave even when he is terrified. He must adapt even when he feels overwhelmed. He must keep up even when the pace endangers him. He must trust Rick even when Rick does not earn that trust. Morty feels the pressure of this dynamic growing heavier with each passing experience. Rick treats danger like a puzzle, but Morty feels every moment of it in his bones. Rick talks in theories, but Morty feels consequences. Rick calculates outcomes, but Morty carries the emotional residue long after the adventure ends. Morty realizes that being chosen means being pulled into situations where he has no control, no understanding, and no say in the outcome. He is chosen to experience fear, not to avoid it. The weight becomes harder to bear when Morty begins to see how deeply Rick shapes his worldview. Morty cannot unsee the things Rick shows him. Realities where people like him do not matter. Planets where morality does not exist. Worlds where life is disposable and identity is fluid. Rick drags Morty into these spaces without hesitation, and Morty, wanting to prove himself, wanting to believe he has a place beside Rick, tries to adapt. But adapting comes with a price. It changes him, it erodes him, it makes him feel older than his years. Morty begins to wonder whether Rick ever intended to protect him. He notices how often Rick moves ahead without checking whether Morty is close behind. He notices how often Rick's plans rely on Morty's compliance. He notices how Rick expects him to endure trauma with minimal reaction. Morty feels this expectation press against his chest, like a hand he cannot push away. Being chosen means Rick expects him to be resilient, to recover quickly, to absorb the impact and keep moving. This expectation begins to affect Morty deeply. He starts to hide his emotions to avoid disappointing Rick. He hides his fear. He hides his hurt. He hides his confusion. He pretends he is fine when he is not. He tries to appear strong even when he feels himself breaking. Morty becomes fluent in silence because silence seems easier than admitting the truth. That being chosen by Rick does not always feel like belonging. Sometimes it feels like being trapped. Another part of the weight comes from the way others perceive their partnership. Morty sees the look in Beth's eyes when Rick drags him out of the house again. He sees the resignation in Jerry, who feels powerless to intervene. He sees the frustration in Summer, who feels excluded and overlooked. Morty begins to feel guilty. He realizes that being chosen creates distance between him and his family. The adventures that shape his identity also isolate him. The more Rick chooses him, the further he drifts from the life he once knew. Morty also begins to sense that Rick needs him in ways Rick never admits. Rick does not want to be alone. Rick does not want to face his own emptiness without distraction. Morty becomes that distraction, that emotional buffer, that anchor. Morty feels torn between empathy and resentment. He wants to help Rick because he cares, but he also feels used. He feels like he is filling a role that should never have belonged to him. The burden grows heavier when Morty realizes that being chosen means inheriting danger without inheriting power. Rick can navigate threats with intelligence and confidence. Morty cannot. Rick can manipulate situations to his advantage. Morty cannot. Rick has lived a long life, filled with knowledge Morty cannot begin to grasp. Morty understands that he is always at a disadvantage, always one step behind, always in danger of being swept aside by forces he cannot comprehend. Yet, despite all this, Morty does not walk away. The weight is heavy, but he carries it because he hopes being chosen might eventually mean something more. He hopes that Rick will see him as a partner, not a pawn. He hopes that someday the choice will be mutual, not default. Morty's sadness deepens precisely because he wants to believe there is meaning in the chaos. He wants to believe Rick chooses him because he cares, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. The weight of being chosen becomes one of the most defining aspects of Morty's identity. It shapes the way he sees himself. It shapes the way he navigates fear. It shapes the way he processes grief, disappointment, and hope. He learns that being chosen is not the same as being valued. He learns that being important to someone does not guarantee emotional safety. He learns that loyalty can become a burden when it is not reciprocated. But Morty also discovers something quietly powerful within this burden. He discovers that he can endure more than he thought. He discovers that he can find clarity even in confusion. He discovers that he can remain kind even when kindness is inconvenient. He discovers that his sadness does not break him. It teaches him how to grow. By the end of this chapter of his life, Morty understands that being chosen by Rick is complicated. It hurts him, it shapes him, it teaches him. It forces him to confront truths he would never have faced alone. The weight does not lessen, but he becomes stronger in the way he carries it. Morty finally sees that sadness and significance often appear side by side. Being chosen does not protect him. It exposes him. But in that exposure, he begins to become someone capable of carrying both fear and hope at once. For Morty Smith, adventure begins as a promise of excitement, escape, and wonder. A promise that life can be bigger than school hallways and awkward conversations. A promise that the universe is filled with possibilities waiting to be explored. At first, Morty believes in that promise. He clings to it with the enthusiasm of someone who has never seen the true price of curiosity. But as the adventures continue, as the dangers grow sharper, Morty learns that every journey extracts something from him. Something personal, something irreplaceable. The cost of adventure becomes a quiet sorrow woven into the fabric of his life. The cost does not arrive all at once. It appears gradually in subtle shifts. The first cost is fear. Not the immediate fear of a monster or a weapon or an alien threat. It is a deeper fear that grows from uncertainty. Morty never knows what Rick is bringing him into. He never knows if he will return home safely. He never knows if today's adventure will be a simple distraction or a life-altering ordeal. This uncertainty settles into his body like a constant tension. He becomes hyper-aware, always bracing for something he cannot predict. The excitement he once felt begins to mix with dread. Another cost reveals itself in the form of exhaustion. Morty is constantly pushed beyond his limits. He seldom has time to process what he experiences before being thrown into something new. His emotions pile up without release. His thoughts become tangled. His memories blend together in ways that confuse him. The exhaustion is not only physical, it is emotional, mental, and spiritual. Morty begins to feel older than his years. The universe speeds him up while his childhood slips away without warning. The cost also appears in the way Morty begins to lose trust in stability. Adventure teaches him that nothing is secure. A safe moment can turn dangerous. A friendly figure can become a threat. A peaceful environment can transform into chaos in seconds. Morty learns not to take anything for granted. He internalizes the idea that safety is temporary, that peace is fragile, and that stability is an illusion. This awareness makes him cautious. It makes him suspicious. It makes him reluctant to relax. Even when things are calm, part of him expects the calm to shatter. Another cost emerges in how Morty starts seeing people differently. He encounters beings whose lives end without consequence. He sees civilizations destroyed by accident. He witnesses suffering that no one tries to prevent. Morty begins to understand that life is not valued equally across the universe. This realization hurts him. It forces him to question his own morality. It forces him to confront his empathy. It forces him to accept that his desire to help does not always translate into action. Morty carries guilt from these moments, even when he has no power to change the outcome. The cost of adventure also affects Morty's relationships. He becomes distant without intending to. He finds it difficult to talk about the things he has seen, not because he is hiding them, but because he cannot put them into words. His family does not understand the depth of what he experiences. They see the surface, they see the exhaustion, they see the fear, but they do not see the layers beneath. Morty feels alone even when surrounded by people. The distance grows silently, not out of choice, but out of incomprehension. One of the most painful costs is the erosion of Morty's self-perception. Each adventure forces him to confront parts of himself he does not want to see. He realizes he can make mistakes that hurt others. He realizes he can freeze when he wishes he could act. He realizes he can feel anger, confusion, and despair he cannot express. These emotions challenge his understanding of who he is. He wants to be brave, but fear overwhelms him. He wants to be steady, but chaos destabilizes him. He wants to be strong, but vulnerability spills out in unexpected moments. He begins to wonder who he really is beneath the layers of survival. Morty also faces the cost of knowledge. He learns things no child should know. that life can be erased without ceremony, that identity can be rewritten through circumstance, that morality shifts depending on the universe, that death does not always bring closure, that existence is fragile. This knowledge settles in his mind like stones piled on top of one another, heavy, permanent, unavoidable. It shapes his worldview in ways that make him feel disconnected from kids his age, who do not carry these burdens. Another cost is the gradual fading of wonder. Morty once viewed the unknown with excitement. He imagined discoveries, mysteries, and awe. But the more he sees, the more that wonder transforms. It becomes tinged with fear, sadness, or caution. The universe is still vast, but it is no longer gentle. Morty begins to view new worlds with weary eyes. He still appreciates beauty, but the beauty feels fragile, temporary, easily broken. Adventure takes away the innocence of wonder and replaces it with the awareness of impermanence. The cost also surfaces in Morty's sense of agency. He spends most of his adventures reacting rather than choosing. Decisions are made for him. Paths are forged without his consent. He is dragged into situations where he must survive, not participate. This lack of control becomes unsettling. Morty wants to make choices, but adventure seldom gives him the time. He learns to act quickly, but that speed comes at a cost. He rarely understands the full consequences of his actions until it is too late. At times, Morty begins to resent the adventures. He resents the fear, the exhaustion, the danger. He resents the loss of simplicity. He resents the ways he feels changed without wanting to be. But he also feels guilty for resenting them. Part of him still craves the connection these moments give him with Rick. Part of him still finds wonder in the strangeness of the universe. Part of him still hopes for meaning amid the chaos. This conflict becomes one of the quiet tragedies of Morty's life. He wants adventure to build him, not break him. He wants to grow without losing pieces of himself. The final cost of adventure reveals itself in the moments after it ends, when Morty returns home, when the house is quiet, when the world feels normal, when his family acts as though nothing has changed. In these moments, Morty sits alone with everything he has experienced. He feels the weight of it in his chest, the sadness, the confusion, the lingering fear. Adventure does not end when the portal closes. It lives inside him, in his thoughts, in his questions, in the subtle shifts of his identity. Morty eventually realizes that the cost of adventure is not something he can escape. It is something he must learn to carry. It becomes part of him. It changes the way he sees himself, others, and the universe. It shapes him into someone who understands fragility and strength at the same time. Someone who feels deeply even when the world tries to harden him. Someone who can endure sadness without losing compassion. Morty's journey is not defined by the excitement of adventure, but by the quiet sorrow it leaves behind. The cost is high, but so is his capacity to endure it. And that endurance becomes a hidden strength he carries into every chapter of his life. Morty Smith does not shatter all at once. He breaks in pieces. Small, delicate fractures that appear in moments of fear, confusion, or heartbreak. Moments that seem quick from the outside, but linger in his memory like echoes he can never quiet. These moments do not turn him cold. They do not make him cruel. Instead, they settle into him quietly, reshaping the way he sees the universe and himself. Each one leaves a mark. Each one becomes a milestone in his gradual loss of innocence. One of the first breaking moments arrives when Morty realizes that not every version of him survives. When he sees an alternate reality where things go wrong for him, he is confronted with the idea that his existence is not secure. He is not chosen by fate. He is not protected by destiny. He is simply one version among countless possibilities. The knowledge rattles him. It forces him to see himself not as a singular special person, but as one outcome in an endless multiverse. Morty does not fully understand the implications yet, but the weight of that understanding lodges itself in his heart. Another breaking moment comes when he witnesses the fragility of life in a direct, undeniable way. Morty sees someone die, not as a dramatic climax, but as an incidental consequence of the world he has entered. The death is quick, unceremonious, unacknowledged. Rick moves on without comment. The universe moves on without consequence. Only Morty pauses. Only Morty feels the shock. Only Morty absorbs the realization that life can end without meaning. This awareness breaks something gentle in him. It takes away the illusion that morality can always create order in chaos. A deeply painful breaking point emerges when Morty realizes that Rick's decisions can hurt people he cares about. He begins to understand that Rick's genius does not make him safe. Rick's brilliance solves problems, but it also creates them. Morty sees that Rick's choices sometimes cause pain that Morty must witness. Up close, Morty begins to fear not only the universe, but the collateral damage of the person he follows. This fear grows slowly, like a shadow stretching behind him. One of the most impactful breaking moments occurs when Morty learns that Rick does not always take responsibility for the harm he causes. Morty wants accountability. He wants acknowledgement. He wants Rick to feel something for the chaos he leaves behind. But Rick shrugs it off. He minimizes. He distracts. He buries emotion beneath sarcasm. Morty watches this pattern repeat and feels a quiet ache. He wonders why he feels pain when Rick feels none. He wonders why empathy makes him suffer more than cynicism does. This disconnect breaks him in a way that is difficult to articulate. It makes him feel emotionally alone in Rick's world. Another break comes when Morty sees how easily his own family can be replaced or duplicated in the multiverse. The realization terrifies him. It undermines everything he was taught about loyalty, love, and identity. If versions of his family exist everywhere, what makes his version meaningful? What makes him meaningful? Morty grapples with these questions long after the adventure ends. He begins to feel disoriented, as though his life is one possibility among many rather than a single, irreplaceable story. A more personal breaking moment arrives when Morty tries to assert himself and is dismissed. Rick ignores his input. Summer trivializes his fears. Adults talk over him. Morty feels unseen even when he is standing in the middle of the room. This invisibility becomes one of his deepest wounds. When he is dismissed, Morty does not shout. He does not fight. He internalizes the rejection. He wonders if his thoughts lack value. He wonders if his emotions matter at all. Each dismissal chips away at his confidence. A core breaking point in Morty's journey is the first time he realizes that his own decisions can cause harm. He wants to do the right thing, but sometimes panic or inexperience leads him toward mistakes. When these mistakes have consequences, Morty feels guilt settle into him like a quiet storm. He does not know how to forgive himself. He does not know how to reconcile his compassion with the fact that he is capable of causing pain. This moment fractures his self-image. He begins to see himself as someone who could fail in ways that hurt others. Another shattering moment occurs when Morty experiences betrayal. Not dramatic betrayal, but the subtle kind. the kind where someone he trusts withholds information or uses him as a tool. Morty learns that loyalty is not always mutual in Rick's world. This lesson hurts him deeply because Morty's loyalty is sincere. He cares even when he is tired. He trusts even when he is afraid. Betrayal breaks him not because he expected perfection, but because he expected honesty. When honesty fails him, his heart breaks quietly. One of the most soul-shaking moments comes when Morty must pretend to be fine after something traumatic. The world around him keeps moving as though nothing happened. Rick cracks a joke. Life goes on. Morty stands still, frozen inside his own mind, feeling the weight of what he just survived. He wants to pause. He wants to breathe, but the moment passes before he can. These silent afterward moments break him more than the events themselves. The universe gives him no time to process. His emotions pile up behind a door he is too afraid to open. Another painful moment arrives when Morty begins to fear his own emotional bandwidth. The more he experiences, the more he realizes he feels things intensely. Every loss stays with him. Every mistake haunts him. Every frightening moment reappears in his thoughts when he tries to sleep. Morty begins to worry that he is too sensitive for the life Rick drags him into, that his depth of feeling is a weakness. This fear breaks a piece of him that he tries desperately to keep intact. One of the most heartbreaking breaks happens when Morty realizes that Rick's approval does not heal him. Morty tries to earn Rick's respect. He tries to impress him. He hopes Rick will acknowledge him in a way that fills the aching space inside his chest. But even when Rick praises him, the feeling is temporary. Approval does not soothe the deeper wounds. Morty begins to see that no amount of validation will fix the sadness that grows quietly inside him. This truth breaks him gently but permanently. The final kind of break Morty experiences is not violent or dramatic. It is subtle. It is the moment he realizes the universe will never return to what he believed it was. He has seen too much. He has lost too much. He has learned too much. Childhood, for Morty, is not something he grows out of naturally. It is something pulled away from him piece by piece. When he finally understands this, something inside him settles. Something inside him mourns. Something inside him breaks in a way that cannot be undone. But these breaks do not destroy him. They carve space for growth. They create openings where strength can take root. Morty's sadness deepens, but so does his resilience. He learns that breaking is not the end of a person. It is the beginning of becoming someone who can carry both pain and purpose without losing either. For Morty Smith, the hardest part of adventure is not the danger. It is not the running, the shouting, the confusion, or the fear. The hardest part is what comes after, the quiet, the return to stillness, the moment when the world stops shaking but his body keeps remembering. Morty learns that silence can be louder than explosions. Silence can hold more weight than chaos. Silence can echo with everything he is trying not to think about. When an adventure ends, Rick usually moves on instantly. He wipes his hands, makes a sarcastic remark, and heads to the garage for another experiment. Rick does not stay in the moment. He refuses to linger. Morty, however, cannot detach so easily. He carries everything with him. His heart pounds long after the danger is gone. His breathing remains unsteady. His thoughts loop. His memories trigger without warning. Morty returns home physically, but emotionally, he is still out there, trapped in the world he barely survived. This contrast creates one of the loneliest experiences of Morty's life. He stands in the doorway of his home, surrounded by normalcy, but he does not feel normal. His family watches television. They argue about chores. They ask casual questions that do not touch the truth of what he has just been through. Morty nods and pretends everything is fine because it is easier than explaining the unexplainable. Part of him wants to tell them everything, but another part knows that even if they listened, they would not understand. Silence becomes his default response because the truth feels too heavy. Morty does not know how to process the chaos he experiences. He sits on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall, feeling the aftermath swirl inside him like a storm that refuses to dissipate. He thinks about what he saw, what he felt, what he almost lost. Sometimes his hands shake. Sometimes his stomach knots. Sometimes he closes his eyes and feels the moment replaying in vivid detail. These internal echoes do not fade quickly. They linger until the next adventure arrives and replaces one storm with another. The silence also forces Morty to confront the truths he tries to avoid. When he is alone, he realizes how scared he was. He realizes how close he came to losing everything. He realizes how powerless he felt in the moment. He realizes how the universe does not bend for him, how danger is not a story arc but a reality. Morty tries to breathe through these realizations, but the breath never seems deep enough. Silence gives him space to feel emotions he would rather suppress, and that space becomes overwhelming. One of the most painful aspects of this silence is how it emphasizes his isolation. Morty wants comfort. He wants reassurance. He wants someone to tell him that what he is feeling makes sense. But Rick does not offer that, and Morty does not know how to ask for it. His family does not see the signs, and Morty is too exhausted to explain. He withdraws more each time. The silence becomes the barrier between him and the people he loves. A barrier he did not choose, but cannot dismantle. Morty begins to associate silence with vulnerability. When the chaos stops, his defenses fall. His emotions rise to the surface. He becomes aware of how much he has been holding inside. He notices the sadness he has been ignoring. He notices the tension in his shoulders. He notices the exhaustion behind his eyes. He notices how young he still is, despite everything. These realizations soften him in painful ways. Silence opens the door to emotions that he does not have the tools to process. Sometimes, Morty tries to distract himself from the silence. He turns on the television. He plays a game. He talks to someone about something meaningless. He tries to bury the feelings under noise, but noise is temporary. It fills the room, not the emptiness inside him. When the distraction fades, the silence returns, heavier than before. Morty begins to understand that distraction cannot heal him. He needs something deeper, something emotional, something human. But he does not know where to find it. Occasionally, Morty looks at Rick during these quiet moments, searching for some sign that Rick feels the same after the chaos. He searches for a hint of fatigue, a flicker of regret, a trace of emotional residue. But Rick hides everything behind science, humor, and alcohol. Morty envies Rick's ability to move on so easily. He envies the emotional detachment, even as he fears it. Morty wonders if he will become like Rick someday. The thought scares him more than the adventures do. One of the most heartbreaking parts of the silence is the way Morty tries to pretend he is unaffected. He straightens his posture. He forces a smile. He acts like everything is normal. He tries to convince himself that he is strong enough to handle anything. But inside, he feels the quiet ache of sadness growing. He feels the gap between the life he used to know and the life he now lives. He feels the emotional toll of being a child carrying burdens meant for adults. Morty also begins to dread the silence, not because he dislikes quiet, but because silence brings honesty. When the world around him stops speaking, his mind begins to whisper truths he is not ready to face. The truth that he is scared. The truth that he feels alone. The truth that he is changing in ways he cannot control. The truth that every adventure takes something from him. The truth that he is growing up too fast. These whispers become louder each time he returns home. Despite the heaviness, the silence does something else too. It creates space for growth. In these quiet moments, Morty begins to understand himself. He learns how deeply he feels emotions. He learns how much he values connection. He learns that he has limits, even when Rick pushes him to ignore them. He learns that his sadness is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of humanity. Silence becomes the place where Morty recognizes the parts of himself that chaos cannot touch. Morty does not choose the silence. It chooses him. It arrives after every storm, reminding him that survival is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of reflection, the beginning of healing, the beginning of understanding. Over time, Morty grows more familiar with this quiet aftermath. He still fears it, but he begins to see it as part of his identity, a space where he can breathe without pretending, a space where he can finally hear himself. By the end of this stage of his journey, Morty recognizes that the silence after the chaos is not empty. It is full of emotion, full of memory, full of truth. It is the place where he learns to carry the sadness he cannot express, the place where he begins to understand the depth of his own resilience, the place where he slowly, quietly grows into someone who can face the next adventure, not because he is unafraid, but because he has learned how to listen to the stillness that follows. Morty Smith feels everything. He feels fear deeply, sadness deeply, guilt deeply, hope deeply. This sensitivity is the core of who he is. It is the part of him that makes him different from Rick, different from most people he meets, and different from the versions of himself scattered across the multiverse. But the more Morty experiences, the more he begins to fear something quietly creeping into his life. The fear of numbness. The fear that emotional overload will not break him, but dull him. The fear that the only way to survive the universe is to stop feeling anything at all. This fear grows slowly, shaped by the contrast between Morty and Rick. Morty sees how Rick moves through the universe with detachment, how he compartmentalizes everything, how he shrugs at horrors, laughs at danger, and treats consequences like background noise. Morty sees Rick's numbness not as strength, but as a scar so deep and old that it has become part of him. Morty does not want that. He does not want to lose the parts of himself that still care. Yet with each adventure, Morty feels that risk drawing closer. At first, he notices it in small ways. The first time he witnesses something terrifying and does not react with the same shock. The first time he sees suffering and feels a delayed sadness instead of immediate compassion. The first time he realizes he is getting used to the chaos, getting used to running, getting used to danger, getting used to the feeling of uncertainty twisting in his chest. Morty becomes quietly alarmed by how familiar these sensations feel. He begins to wonder if numbness is not a choice, but an inevitability, a consequence of surviving too many impossible situations. He tries to resist it, but resisting emotional fatigue is like trying to hold on to water. Every experience adds weight. Every escape drains energy. Every close call erodes one more edge of innocence. Morty fears that the constant exposure to trauma will harden him in ways he cannot reverse. One of the earliest signs of potential numbness appears when Morty realizes he is not shocked by Rick's behavior anymore. The first time Rick does something morally questionable, Morty feels outrage. The 10th time, he feels discomfort. The 100th time, he feels only a heaviness he cannot name. Morty wonders whether this means he is adapting or collapsing, whether he is becoming stronger or simply losing pieces of himself to exhaustion. Another sign of numbness emerges when Morty stops questioning his own fear. Instead of resisting the terror he feels, he begins to push it down automatically. He becomes skilled at ignoring his instincts, skilled at suppressing panic, skilled at pretending he is unaffected. These coping mechanisms help him survive, but they cost him something. They distance him from his own emotions. They create a buffer that Morty fears will eventually become permanent. Morty also begins to notice numbness in his reactions to danger. He stops screaming as loudly. He stops panicking as quickly. He stops pleading with Rick to slow down. Instead, he moves almost automatically, following Rick's lead with a kind of mechanical clarity. Morty becomes afraid of this clarity. It does not feel like bravery. It feels like the early stages of emotional disconnect, a sign that he is adapting to danger in ways he never wanted to. The fear becomes stronger when Morty realizes he has trouble distinguishing between genuine calm and numb resignation. Sometimes he feels strangely peaceful in chaotic situations, and this unsettles him. He wonders if he is becoming desensitized, if the part of him that should react with fear is shutting down, if experiencing too much too quickly has reshaped his internal landscape. He struggles to tell whether his calmness is maturity or emotional fatigue. Morty's fear of numbness intensifies when he notices his reactions after returning home. Instead of crying, he sits quietly. Instead of shaking, he stares into nothing. Instead of processing the moment, he lets it pass through him like a wave he is too tired to resist. These reactions scare him. They scare him because they feel like the opposite of healing. Healing requires feeling. Numbness requires shutting down. Morty senses himself inching toward the latter. The fear grows further when he sees that numbness might be contagious. He begins to mimic Rick's behavior without meaning to. The sarcasm, the detachment, the dismissal of emotions. Morty catches himself laughing at things that should horrify him, catching himself enjoying the adrenaline of danger more than he wants to admit, catching himself slipping into patterns he does not understand. This self-awareness frightens him. It feels like losing control over who he is becoming. Morty's fear of numbness reaches its deepest point when he realizes something heartbreaking. There are moments where he prefers numbness, moments when not feeling seems easier than dealing with the emotional weight he carries. Moments where he wishes he could turn off his empathy the way Rick seems to. Moments where relief comes from emotional void rather than emotional clarity. This desire terrifies him because it feels like stepping toward a version of himself he does not want to become. Yet even as this fear grows, there is a quiet truth beneath it. The fact that Morty fears numbness means he has not lost his capacity to feel. The fear itself is evidence of his depth. He is aware of the danger. He is aware of the transformation he wants to avoid. He is aware of the value of his emotions, even when they hurt. This awareness becomes a shield. It prevents him from drifting too far into detachment. It reminds him of what he is protecting. Morty begins to fight back against numbness in small, gentle ways. He allows himself to feel sadness when it comes. He reflects on the memories rather than burying them. He acknowledges fear even when he cannot express it out loud. He holds onto compassion deliberately, even when compassion feels painful. These acts of emotional maintenance keep him anchored. They keep him human. They keep him from becoming someone he does not recognize. The fear of numbness shapes Morty as much as the numbness itself. It teaches him to value his sensitivity. It teaches him that feeling deeply is not a weakness. It teaches him that pain, while difficult, is proof of his humanity. It teaches him that resisting emotional shutdown is an act of quiet strength. By the end of this stage, Morty realizes that numbness is a threat, but not destiny. It is something he can resist as long as he remains aware of it, as long as he holds onto the desire to stay compassionate. As long as he honors the weight of his own emotions, Morty may live in a universe that tries to harden him, but he refuses to become unfeeling. That refusal is one of his greatest sources of quiet sadness, and also one of his greatest sources of inner strength. Morty Smith is not meant to understand the universe, not at his age, not with his heart, not with his capacity for empathy. Knowledge is supposed to come slowly, in manageable pieces that allow a child to grow into the person they will become. But Morty's knowledge arrives all at once. It arrives violently, unexpectedly, and without filter. Each adventure shows him something he was never meant to see, something he cannot unsee, something he cannot explain to anyone who has not lived it. Knowledge becomes a weight, a quiet burden he carries alone. Morty learns early that the universe is too vast for order. He learns that morality is not universal, that suffering can happen without reason, that entire civilizations can disappear without being remembered. These truths lodge themselves in his mind like sharp stones. He does not know where to put them. He cannot discuss them with his classmates. He cannot talk about them with his family. He cannot process them with Rick, who dismisses emotional reactions as irrelevant. Morty is left alone with knowledge that would overwhelm even an adult. One of the heaviest pieces of knowledge he carries is the understanding that reality is unstable. Morty sees worlds where physics works differently, worlds where consciousness has different rules, worlds where his identity has no meaning. He learns that existence is flexible, that universes can collapse, that timelines can fracture. This awareness sits in his thoughts, like a quiet hum, reminding him that the world he knows is not secure. Morty tries to live normally, but the knowledge of instability follows him into every mundane moment. Another burden comes from understanding how fragile life truly is. Morty sees people die, not because they deserved it, but because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. He sees randomness shape destinies. He sees innocence discarded. He sees cruelty justified by necessity. These experiences force Morty to confront the truth that life is not guaranteed. That safety is temporary. That survival can depend on something as simple as where he stands. This understanding fills him with a sadness that does not fade. Morty also carries the knowledge of the things he himself has done. He remembers mistakes that cost lives. He remembers decisions he made under pressure, decisions he did not fully understand until it was too late. He remembers moments where he froze, moments where he acted impulsively, moments where he questioned his own morality. These memories become burdens because Morty is incapable of ignoring the emotional impact. He feels responsible even when Rick tells him not to. He feels guilt even when the situation was out of his control. One of the most overwhelming forms of knowledge Morty carries is the realization that many versions of him exist. Some better, some worse, some living peaceful lives he envies, some suffering in ways he cannot imagine. This awareness fractures his sense of identity. He wonders whether his choices matter if other versions of him make different choices. He wonders whether he is unique or simply one of many? He wonders what makes him him. These questions linger in his mind long after he leaves the alternate worlds behind. Morty also learns too much about Rick. He sees Rick's intelligence, Rick's power, Rick's loneliness, Rick's addictions, Rick's self-hatred. Morty understands Rick's pain in ways Rick does not admit. This knowledge shapes Morty's loyalty, but also his heartbreak. Morty becomes one of the few people who sees Rick as a whole person. This insight connects them, but it also weighs heavily on Morty. He carries the knowledge of a grandfather who refuses help, refuses softness, refuses vulnerability. Morty carries the emotional truth Rick hides from everyone, including himself. Another burden Morty carries is the knowledge of how fragile his family is. He sees the cracks in Beth's confidence. He sees the insecurity in Jerry's optimism. He sees the loneliness in Summer's independence. He sees the tension beneath every family argument. He understands their emotional fragility more deeply than they realize. This knowledge makes Morty protective, but also overwhelmed. He feels responsible for harmony he cannot create, responsible for peace he cannot maintain. This weight grows quietly inside him over time. Morty also carries knowledge of his own limits. He knows he cannot save everyone. He knows he cannot fix every situation. He knows he cannot always be brave. This awareness humbles him, but it also hurts him. He wants to do more than he is capable of. He wants to be better than he feels. He wants to meet the expectations he believes are placed on him. But knowledge reminds him of his humanity, of his imperfection, of his fear. The burden becomes heavier when Morty realizes that knowledge does not bring clarity, it brings confusion, moral grayness, impossible choices, ambiguity. Morty begins to understand that the universe is not something he can figure out. It is something he must survive. But survival through knowledge feels like a lonely process. He cannot turn off his understanding. He cannot reduce the complexity. He cannot go back to the way he thought before. Yet knowledge is not purely destructive. It also shapes Morty's empathy. The more he learns, the more he understands suffering. The more he sees, the more compassion grows inside him. He becomes someone who can recognize pain in others. Someone who can understand fear without judgment. Someone who can find meaning where others see chaos. Knowledge hurts him, but it also deepens him. It creates a quiet strength that does not rely on bravado, a strength rooted in understanding. Morty eventually realizes that the burden of knowing too much is not something he can escape. It is something he integrates. He learns how to carry it without letting it crush him. He learns how to feel sadness without drowning in it. He learns how to process trauma even when the world does not pause for him. He learns how to hold complexity without breaking. This burden becomes part of his identity, part of what makes him compassionate, part of what makes him strong, part of what makes him capable of surviving a universe that does not care about comfort. By the end of this stage, Morty understands that knowledge is both a wound and a gift. It makes life heavier, but it also gives depth to every emotion he feels. The burden of knowing too much becomes one of the quiet truths he carries, shaping the way he moves through the universe with sadness, yes, but also with a uniquely profound understanding of what it means to be alive. Morty Smith does not mean to drift away from his family. It happens quietly, slowly, between adventures, between moments where the universe reshapes him in ways no one else can see. At home, he tries to be the same boy he was before Rick pulled him through his first portal. He tries to fit back into routines that once felt comforting. He tries to speak in a voice that used to feel natural. But the gap between who he was and who he is becoming grows wider with each experience. This gap becomes a silent distance. A distance Morty does not choose, but cannot ignore. The distance begins when Morty realizes that his family has no way of understanding what he has been through. They do not know the fear he carries. They do not understand the trauma that lingers in his thoughts. They do not recognize the sadness behind his quiet moments. Morty does not blame them. How could they know? How could anyone? His experiences are too strange to explain, too vast, too heavy. If he tried to tell them everything, the words would feel unreal, like pieces of dreams instead of memories. Morty holds back because the truth feels too large to share. Morty also senses an emotional distance forming between him and his mother. Beth loves him deeply, but she is consumed by her own struggles, her identity crisis, her longing for independence, her unresolved resentment toward her father, her fear of being ordinary. Morty sees these fractures more clearly than she realizes. He watches her mask, her insecurities. He watches her try to assert control in a house where control is impossible. Morty knows she needs support, but he feels too overwhelmed to give it. He wants to be her son, not her emotional caretaker. This tension creates space between them, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. The distance with Jerry emerges in a different way. Jerry tries to protect Morty, tries to shield him, tries to keep him grounded in normalcy. But Morty's reality no longer fits inside the world Jerry understands. Jerry offers simple advice for complex problems. He reacts with fear to situations Morty has long grown used to. Morty begins to see Jerry as fragile, well-meaning but fragile. And once Morty sees someone as fragile, he stops confiding in them. He does not want to burden Jerry. He does not want to worry him. He does not want to expose him to truths he cannot handle. The distance grows from Morty's desire to protect him. Even when Jerry tries to pull him closer, Summer feels the distance too. She notices the changes in Morty first. She sees the tension in his face, the shadows under his eyes, the way he leaves a room quietly, the way he avoids certain questions. Summer wants to understand, but she is caught between wanting to follow Morty into Rick's world and wanting to stay grounded in her own. She reaches for him in small ways, jokes, conversations, shared moments. But Morty often feels too lost in his own mind to meet her halfway. He cares for her deeply, yet he cannot find the words to explain the weight he carries. Their connection becomes fragmented, still present, but harder to reach. One of the most painful aspects of this distance is the way Morty begins to feel like a visitor in his own home. He sits at the dinner table, but feels detached from the conversations. He hears arguments that feel trivial compared to the dangers he has witnessed. He walks through hallways that once felt safe, but now feel distant and unresponsive. Home becomes a place that has not changed, even though he has. Morty senses this mismatch and withdraws further. He does not know how to bridge the gap. Another source of distance comes from Morty's guilt. He feels guilty for the secrets he keeps, guilty for the pain he brings home, guilty for the moments he disappears without explanation, guilty for being a source of conflict between Rick and his parents. Guilt becomes the silent force that pushes him away from his family even when he longs for closeness. He believes that protecting them means hiding the truth, hiding the sadness, hiding the fear. But hiding creates distance, and distance feeds the guilt. Morty also fears burdening his family with his emotional struggles. He fears being seen as weak. He fears being misunderstood. He fears disappointing them. These fears keep him silent even when he needs connection. Morty internalizes everything because he believes that expressing his feelings will cause problems he cannot predict. He convinces himself that solitude is safer, that silence is easier, that distance is kinder. Over time, Morty becomes emotionally bilingual. He speaks one language at home, pretending to be the boy they expect. He speaks another language with himself, filled with memories of worlds and dangers and griefs he cannot describe. These two versions of Morty drift apart like separate identities. The distance between them becomes a quiet sorrow. Morty feels torn between the life he lives and the life he survives. He does not know how to merge them. One of the quiet tragedies of Morty's distance from his family is that they often interpret his silence incorrectly. They assume he is upset about school, or tired, or distracted. They do not see the depth of what weighs on him. Morty begins to feel invisible, not because they do not care, but because his pain exists in a place they cannot access. This invisibility deepens the sadness inside him. It reinforces the belief that he must navigate his emotions alone. Despite the distance, Morty still loves his family. He loves Beth's strength. He loves Jerry's optimism. He loves Summer's intensity. He loves the sense of home they create, even when it feels far away. But love does not erase the emotional gap. Morty moves through the house, like someone balancing two versions of himself, hoping neither one collapses. The distance becomes part of Morty's emotional landscape, a quiet ache he carries into each day. A reminder that trauma does not only affect the person who experiences it, it affects the connections around them. Morty does not want the distance, but he does not know how to close it. He hopes that someday he will find the courage to speak more openly, to allow his family into the shadows he carries, to rebuild closeness he misses deeply. By the end of this stage, Morty understands something heartbreaking. Distance does not mean he loves his family less. It means he is trying to protect them from the truth, protect them from the universe, protect them from the parts of himself he does not yet understand. This realization softens his sadness, but it does not erase it. The distance remains, not as a rejection, but as a quiet consequence of surviving a world that his family cannot see. Loving Rick Sanchez is one of the most complicated emotional experiences of Morty Smith's life. It is not simple affection, not simple admiration, not simple loyalty. It is something heavier, something tangled, something that hurts and heals at the same time. Morty loves Rick because Rick is brilliant, brave, fascinating, and larger than life. But Morty also loves Rick because he sees something in him that others overlook. A sadness, a longing, a quiet emptiness Rick tries endlessly to outrun. Morty recognizes this emptiness because he feels echoes of it in himself. Yet loving Rick is isolating. It places Morty in a world where emotional reciprocity is rare. Rick does not say thank you. He does not apologize. He does not comfort. He does not soothe. He does not reassure. Morty must give affection in a relationship where affection is seldom returned. He must care for someone who hides every vulnerability behind sarcasm, intellect, and alcohol. This imbalance becomes one of the deepest sources of loneliness in Morty's life. The loneliness begins with Rick's unpredictability. Morty never knows which version of Rick he will get. The caring one, hidden beneath layers of denial. The indifferent one, focused solely on experiments. The reckless one, who drags Morty into danger. The detached one, who distances himself from everyone. Morty tries to adapt, but the emotional inconsistency leaves him unsteady. He wants to trust Rick, but trust requires stability. Rick does not offer it. Another source of loneliness comes from the emotional power imbalance. Rick is capable of shaping universes. Morty is just one small person caught in the wake of his decisions. Morty tries to act like a partner, but sometimes he feels more like a passenger. He notices the moments when his voice does not matter, when his opinions are brushed aside, when his emotions go unseen. Morty cares deeply, but caring deeply does not grant him influence over someone who refuses to be influenced. The loneliness grows deeper when Morty realizes that Rick loves him, but in ways Rick does not express. Morty sees the hints, the unspoken concern, the rare moments of softness, the subtle choices that reveal Rick's priorities. Morty sees that Rick's love exists, but it is locked inside him, inaccessible without force. Morty feels the love, but does not receive it directly. This indirect affection becomes painful. It is like holding a warm light through a thick wall. He knows it is there, but he cannot feel it fully. Morty's loneliness also comes from the role he plays in Rick's life. Morty becomes someone Rick relies on for moral grounding and companionship, but not someone he confides in emotionally. Morty wants to support Rick, but he also wants connection. Rick accepts Morty's presence, but resists his closeness. Morty stands beside Rick, but often feels miles away from him emotionally. It is a strange kind of closeness, one built on constant proximity but limited intimacy. Sometimes Morty looks at Rick and sees a person who desperately needs love but refuses to accept it. Morty sees the pain behind Rick's humor, the exhaustion behind his bravado, the loneliness behind his intelligence. Morty tries to bridge these emotional gaps, but Rick always pulls away before the connection becomes too real. Morty is left reaching for someone who steps back just far enough to keep himself safe. The loneliness intensifies when Morty compares his relationship with Rick to other relationships in his life. Rick gives him adventure, but not emotional guidance. He gives him knowledge, but not reassurance. He gives him access to the universe, but not the comfort of belonging. Morty wants both: the infinite worlds and the feeling of being truly seen, but Rick only offers one, and the absence of the other leaves Morty feeling empty. Another layer of loneliness appears when Morty realizes he is becoming one of the only people capable of loving Rick, without conditions. Beth's love is complicated. Jerry's love is frightened. Summer's love is inconsistent. Morty's love is steady. Rick seems to sense this. He gravitates toward Morty during his darkest moments, even if he pretends not to. Morty becomes a kind of anchor for Rick, but being an anchor is exhausting. Morty carries emotional weight that Rick does not acknowledge. Morty also feels lonely because he cannot talk about his feelings for Rick with anyone else. If he tells his family, they will criticize Rick. If he tells Rick, Rick will deflect. If he tells himself, he fears the truth might hurt even more. Morty keeps his affection locked inside his chest. It becomes a quiet ache, a private sadness, a form of love that grows in silence. Over time, the loneliness shifts in shape. Morty begins to understand that loving someone who is emotionally unavailable does not make love any less real. It just makes it heavier. It asks for strength, patience, resilience. Morty loves Rick not because Rick is easy to love, but because Morty's heart is capable of seeing beyond flaws. This capacity is rare. It is painful. It is beautiful. It is lonely. Morty also begins to see the mirror inside this relationship. Rick teaches Morty about the universe. Morty teaches Rick about humanity. Rick shows Morty how to survive. Morty shows Rick how to feel. Rick forces Morty to face danger. Morty forces Rick to face himself. There is balance here, but it is unspoken. Morty sees it clearly, even when Rick does not. This clarity deepens his sadness, but also his connection. The most profound loneliness Morty feels comes from the way he hopes. He hopes Rick will change. He hopes Rick will open up. He hopes Rick will one day express the affection Morty knows he feels. Morty hopes for a version of Rick who can give love without fear. This hope is what hurts him the most. Hope makes the loneliness sharper, but it also makes it meaningful. Hope keeps Morty connected even when Rick pulls away. By the end of this chapter of his life, Morty understands that loving Rick is both a burden and a gift. A burden because it isolates him. A gift because it shapes him into someone capable of extraordinary compassion. Morty learns that loneliness does not mean the love is wrong. It means the love is deep. It means the love is real. And sometimes it means the love is ahead of its time. Morty carries this quiet sadness with a combination of strength and tenderness. He loves Rick not because he expects anything in return, but because he believes that love, even when lonely, has value. And in that belief, Morty reveals the gentlest truth of his character. He refuses to let the universe teach him to stop caring. Morty Smith does not hold on to hope because the universe gives him reasons to. He holds on to hope because something inside him refuses to let go of the possibility that life can still make sense, that people can still be good, that meaning can still be found even when everything feels fragmented. Hope becomes one of Morty's quiet acts of rebellion. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, honest, persistent. Morty clings to hope, even when hope feels fragile, even when it trembles in his hands, even when each new adventure threatens to crush it. He clings to it because letting go would mean accepting the universe the way Rick sees it. Cold, random, indifferent. Morty is not ready to accept that. He does not want to be the person who stops believing in something better. Hope becomes the line he refuses to cross, the part of himself he refuses to sacrifice. One of the first ways Morty holds on to hope is through the small routines of his everyday life. He still goes to school. He still tries to complete his homework. He still talks to his friends. He still participates in family dinners when he can. These routines anchor him. They remind him that life is not only chaos and fear. There are moments of normalcy hidden between the adventures. Morty holds on to these moments tightly because they offer a glimpse of who he might have been in a different world. A version of himself untouched by cosmic terror. He also clings to hope through his relationships. Even when distance grows between him and his family, Morty believes they care. He believes their flaws are human, not malicious. He believes they are doing their best with what they have. Morty sees the cracks in their personalities, but he also sees the love behind their mistakes. This perspective allows him to hold hope for them. He hopes Beth will find peace. He hopes Jerry will find confidence. He hopes Summer will find her place. Morty hopes for his family more easily than he hopes for himself. Another place. Morty finds hope is in brief moments of kindness. A stranger helping someone in need. A gentle look from someone he barely knows. A moment of honesty in the middle of chaos. These small gestures stand out to Morty because they feel like evidence that goodness still exists. They are reminders that not everyone is shaped by fear or power or selfish desire. Morty holds on to these tiny sparks of kindness as if they are precious. They become emotional fuel that keeps him going when everything else feels overwhelming. Morty also clings to hope by believing he can still influence the world in small ways. He cannot fix the universe. He cannot stop multiversal threats. He cannot outthink Rick. But he can make choices that reflect the person he wants to be. He can choose compassion. He can choose honesty. He can choose to help someone, even when it does not fix the larger problem. These choices matter to him, even if their impact seems small. Morty holds on to the idea that small goodness can still mean something. One of Morty's most vulnerable forms of hope is his belief in emotional connection. Despite everything, he still believes people can care about each other. He still believes relationships can heal. He still believes love exists even in flawed families and broken worlds. He feels this hope most strongly with Rick. He hopes Rick will open up. He hopes Rick will accept help. He hopes Rick will see the value of closeness, even when he avoids it. These hopes often lead to heartbreak, but Morty does not let heartbreak erase them. Morty's hope is not blind. It is a conscious choice. A choice he makes even after the universe shows him ugliness and cruelty. Morty sees the worst and still chooses to believe in the best. This makes his hope heavier, but also more meaningful. Hope that survives trauma is more than optimism. It is courage. At times, Morty clings to hope through his imagination. He imagines futures that feel peaceful, futures where he grows older without being consumed by fear, futures where Rick is present in a way that feels safe, futures where his family manages to heal its fractures. Morty knows these futures may not be realistic, but imagining them offers comfort. The act of dreaming becomes a form of emotional survival. Morty's hope also shows in the way he treats others. He gives second chances. He forgives easily. He assumes good intentions. He tries to see the best in people, even when the universe tells him to expect the worst. These tendencies sometimes put him in danger, but they also protect his heart from turning cold. Morty understands that cynicism is a shortcut that leads nowhere. Hope, even fragile hope, points toward a future he can still believe in. Another quiet form of hope appears when Morty allows himself to feel joy, even briefly. Laughing at something silly, enjoying a moment with Summer, feeling proud when he does something brave. These moments are rare, but they matter deeply. They show Morty that sadness is not the only truth in his life, that joy can still exist, even in a world filled with chaos. Morty treasures these moments because they remind him he has not lost himself. Morty's hope becomes clearest in the way he continually tries to grow. He reflects on his mistakes. He questions his reactions. He attempts to understand his emotions, even when they scare him. Growth itself is a kind of hope. Morty believes he can become someone stronger, wiser, and kinder, even as the universe tries to break him. This self-belief is not arrogance, it is resilience. By the end of this stage of his journey, Morty understands something important. Hope is not a feeling, it is a decision to hold on to the softer parts of himself, a decision to keep believing that life can be meaningful, a decision to protect the parts of his heart that still feel warm. Hope becomes the quiet strength that keeps him from falling into despair. Morty clings to hope because without it, he would become someone he does not want to be. Someone who accepts chaos without questioning it. Someone who views the universe through Rick's disillusioned eyes. Someone who stops caring. Morty refuses to become that person. Hope is his resistance. Hope is his humanity. And holding on to it, even when it hurts, becomes one of the most beautiful truths of his character. Morty Smith learns early that the multiverse holds countless versions of himself. Some are stronger, some are colder, some are happier, some are cruel, some are broken in ways he cannot imagine. Some live quiet lives untouched by cosmic fear. Some never meet Rick at all. This knowledge shapes him in ways he does not expect. It becomes a haunting kind of self-awareness, one that follows him through every adventure and every quiet moment afterward. The existence of alternate Mortys forces Morty to confront the painful truth that who he is now is only one of many possibilities. And each possibility feels like a story he was never allowed to choose. The first time Morty encounters another version of himself, he feels shock. He sees himself reflected back, not in a mirror, but in a different set of circumstances, a different childhood, a different emotional landscape, a different destiny. That initial encounter leaves a mark on him. Morty realizes he is not unique, not in the way children are told they are. He is one outcome among infinite branches, infinite paths that split and twist away from each other. This realization both humbles and frightens him. As he meets more alternate Mortys, he begins to understand something deeper. Each version of him reveals a truth about who he could have become. The confident ones show the strength he sometimes doubts he possesses. The cynical ones show the danger of letting sadness harden him. The broken ones show the cost of giving up. The cruel ones show what happens when fear turns into resentment. Morty carries these reflections inside him, weighing each one carefully. They do not feel like strangers. They feel like futures he narrowly avoided. One of the saddest realizations Morty has is that some versions of him live peaceful, ordinary lives. Lives full of quiet mornings and homework and friendships that do not crumble under cosmic pressure. Lives where fear is rare and manageable. Lives where innocence lasts longer. Morty watches these versions with a mixture of longing and grief. He sees happiness that feels out of reach. He feels envy, not in a petty way, but in a deeply human way. He wonders what it would be like to live without the burdens he carries, without the trauma he hides, without the weight of Rick's world pressing down on him. Another painful moment comes when Morty meets versions of himself who are numb or bitter, versions who have stopped caring, versions who have stopped hoping, versions who have allowed the universe to harden them into something unrecognizable. Morty looks at them and feels fear. He sees in their eyes the very future he fights against. He sees the loneliness he could fall into, the emptiness he could adopt, the cruelty he could learn. These versions serve as warnings. They remind him why he clings to compassion, why he resists numbness, why he tries so hard to stay human. One of the most heartbreaking encounters is with a Morty who has lost everything, a version who stands alone, abandoned by Rick, forgotten by family, stripped of purpose. Morty feels an overwhelming sadness when he sees this version, not because he judges him, but because he recognizes how easy it is to fall into that kind of despair. How one misstep, one tragedy, one missing connection could lead to a life defined by loss. Morty sees himself in this version more than he wants to admit. The grief he feels is quiet but profound. But Morty also encounters versions of himself who are surprisingly strong. Versions who turned pain into determination. Versions who learned how to lead. Versions who refused to be defined by the chaos around them. These versions inspire him. They show him that survival can shape a person in powerful ways. That resilience is not just a possibility, but a real outcome for someone like him. Morty holds on to these versions. They become reminders of who he might become if he continues to fight for his heart. Another complex realization arrives when Morty meets alternate versions of Rick, who treat their Mortys differently. He sees Ricks who show affection more openly, Ricks who build healthier dynamics, Ricks who show gratitude, Ricks who treat their Mortys like partners instead of tools. Morty cannot help but wonder what he would be like with a version of Rick who nurtured instead of overwhelmed, who taught without dismissing, who protected without using. These thoughts create a quiet ache in Morty's chest. He does not resent his Rick, but he mourns the version of himself he never became because he never had that kind of relationship. The existence of alternate Mortis forces him to confront a painful truth. His identity is not purely the product of who he is. It is also shaped by circumstance, by Rick, by trauma, by choices he never meant to make. Morty begins to see that who he could have been is not simply a dream. It is a reality, experienced by someone else with his face and voice. A reality that remains forever out of reach. This understanding becomes a source of grief for Morty, a grief that is difficult to describe. It is not grief over something lost. It is grief over something unchosen, something possible but unreachable. Morty feels this grief most strongly when he sees versions of himself who seem happier. He wonders whether he deserved that happiness, whether he could have reached it under different circumstances, whether it was taken from him before he even understood what he was losing. Yet, even in this grief, Morty finds something meaningful. He realizes that the existence of alternate Mortis means he is not trapped, he is not fixed in a single path. He may be shaped by his circumstances, but he still has agency. He still has the ability to choose who he becomes. The versions of him scattered across the multiverse become a map of possibilities. They show him the dangers and the potential, the darkness and the light. They remind him that he can choose compassion over cruelty, resilience over bitterness, hope over despair. Morty begins to see each alternate version not as competition, but as reflection. Each one reveals a part of himself he might develop or avoid. Each one teaches him something about identity, about possibility, about the power of choice. The multiverse becomes a mirror with infinite angles, and Morty learns to look into it without losing himself. The grief remains, but it does not overwhelm him. It becomes a quiet part of his emotional landscape, a reminder of the paths he did not walk, a reminder of the fragility of identity, a reminder that who he becomes is not predetermined. Morty understands that he is one version among many, but he is also the only version who lives his exact story, the only version who feels his exact hopes and fears, the only version who carries his specific heart. By the end of this stage, Morty realizes that the versions of himself scattered through the multiverse do not diminish his worth. They illuminate it. They show him the complexity of who he is, the vulnerability, the resilience, the sadness, the strength. They show him that identity is not a single thread, but a tapestry of possibilities. Morty sees the versions that could have been and understands that every choice he makes continues to shape the version he will become. Morty Smith has lived through chaos. He has travelled through worlds that defy logic, witnessed events that would break most people, and carried knowledge far heavier than any child should bear. On the surface, his sadness seems to tell the story. The fear, the guilt, the grief, the loneliness, the constant search for meaning in a universe that refuses to provide it. But beneath all of that, something else grows. Something gentle, something steady, something strong. Morty's sadness does not hollow him out. It shapes him. It teaches him how to endure. It teaches him how to continue loving in a world that makes love difficult. This quiet strength begins with acceptance. Morty does not deny his sadness. He does not pretend he is unaffected. He does not hide from the emotional truth of his experiences. He feels everything, fully, even when it hurts. This willingness to feel becomes one of his greatest strengths. Most people run from pain. Morty faces it because he has no choice, and because he understands that ignoring pain does not make it disappear. It only makes it louder. His acceptance of sadness gives him emotional depth that Rick, for all his intelligence, struggles to understand. Another part of Morty's strength comes from his compassion. Despite everything he has witnessed, Morty still cares. He still tries to help others, even when he feels helpless himself. He still worries about strangers. He still feels sympathy for beings others overlook. He still sees the humanity in people Rick writes off as insignificant. This compassion is not naive. It is deliberate. Morty chooses to care because caring keeps him human. Caring reminds him of a truth the universe cannot erase. That empathy has value even when it is not rewarded. Morty's strength also appears in his resilience. Every adventure leaves a mark, yet he continues to step forward. Every traumatic moment adds weight to his shoulders, yet he keeps carrying it. Morty does not collapse under the pressure. He bends, he trembles, he falters, but he keeps going. This resilience is not born from confidence, it is born from survival. Morty learns how to rebuild himself after each break. He learns how to stand again after each fall. He learns how to trust his ability to endure even when he doubts everything else. Another quiet strength lies in Morty's honesty. He does not deceive himself. He does not pretend the universe is kinder than it is. He acknowledges his fear. He admits when he feels overwhelmed. He recognizes when his hope begins to fade. This honesty protects him from the emotional denial that consumes Rick. Denial leads to numbness. Morty avoids it by being truthful with himself, even when the truth is painful. He understands that sadness is a part of him, not a flaw to erase. Morty also shows strength through his ability to hold contradictions without being destroyed by them. He is afraid, yet brave. He is traumatized, yet hopeful. He is insecure, yet resilient. He is overwhelmed, yet compassionate. These contradictions do not weaken him, they make him whole. Morty learns that identity is not a single trait. It is a collection of experiences, feelings, and choices that coexist even when they conflict. This emotional flexibility allows him to survive a universe that demands adaptation. One of Morty's deepest sources of strength is his understanding of connection. He knows how important relationships are, even when they are messy. He knows that Rick's presence in his life is both a burden and a gift. He knows his family is flawed, but he loves them anyway. He knows he needs support, and even when he struggles to ask for it, he senses its value. Morty's ability to maintain meaningful connections in a world filled with fractures becomes a quiet victory. He refuses to detach from others, even when detachment seems easier. Morty's quiet strength also comes from the way he interprets meaning. The universe does not provide meaning. Rick insists there is none, but Morty creates it. He finds meaning in small moments of kindness, in bonds that survive tension, in choosing hope when despair feels easier, in laughing even when sadness lingers beneath the surface. Morty does not need the universe to make sense. He only needs to live in a way that feels honest. This ability to craft meaning becomes his compass. Another place Morty finds strength is in vulnerability. He allows himself to cry when he must. He admits fear when he feels it. He asks questions when he is confused. This emotional openness keeps him grounded. It prevents the build-up of pressure that breaks people from the inside. Morty understands that vulnerability is not weakness. It is a way of staying alive emotionally. It is a way of staying connected to his humanity in a universe determined to strip humanity away. Morty's quiet strength also shows in his choices. He makes decisions based not on power or advantage, but on morality. He chooses kindness, even when others laugh at him for it. He chooses honesty, even when it complicates things. He chooses understanding, even when anger seems simpler. These choices build a foundation for who he becomes. They reinforce the part of him that refuses to be shaped by fear alone. Gradually, Morty begins to understand that his sadness is not an enemy. It is a teacher. It helps him see what matters. It helps him recognize what he values. It helps him understand the fragility of life. Sadness creates empathy, and empathy creates purpose. Morty's sadness is the thread that ties together everything he has learned. It is not the end of his story. It is the shape of his heart. As Morty moves forward, he realizes that his strength is not meant to overpower the universe. It is meant to help him live within it, to navigate its chaos, to protect the parts of himself that remain soft, to grow without losing the innocence he still holds in quiet corners of his heart. Morty's strength is gentle, but it is unbreakable. It comes from a place of honesty, compassion, and a desire to remain human in a world that often forgets what humanity looks like. By the end of his journey, Morty understands something profound. The universe may never become kinder. The chaos may never lessen. Rick may never change in the ways Morty wishes he would. But Morty's sadness, far from defeating him, has shaped him into someone resilient enough to face all of it. Someone who can survive without surrendering his heart. Someone who can hurt without becoming hardened. Someone who can feel deeply without losing control. Someone who chooses hope even when hope is fragile. Morty's quiet sadness is not a sign of weakness. It is a reflection of his strength. A strength that grows in silence. A strength that endures. A strength that defines him. And in that strength, Morty discovers a truth that Rick has never been able to accept. You do not need to stop feeling to survive the universe. Sometimes, feeling is the only way to survive it at all.